like sometimes people say, what are you talking about? The church generating income? No way. It's a nonprofit. It's a church, for goodness sake. And they'll say things like, Pastor, just trust the Lord. Just preach the gospel and trust the Lord, and all your needs, that is the church's needs, will be met in Christ Jesus, right? Just trust the Lord. What do you say to a person like that? You know what you say? You say, let me ask you a question. You ever gone to a doctor? You ever taken prescription medicine? You ever signed a loan to buy a car you couldn't otherwise afford with cash? Where's your faith? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't live like that. Why don't you just sit in your house, read the Bible all day, pray, and then go out and check your mailbox? Do you have a job? Do you have 2 jobs? Do you get up and work hard? Where's your faith? Just sit back, read the Bible and pray, and just go check your mailbox. Right?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mult-Ethnic Gospel Approach podcast, where we cover all things multi-ethnic.
It's the M-E-G-A-B-O-B-C-A-S-T, the Mega Podcast. It's the M-E-G-A-B-O-B-C-A-S-T, Mega Podcast.
What's up, guys? I'm Marcel, and I want to welcome you to the Mult-Ethnic Gospel Approach, a.k.a. the Mega Podcast, where we cover all things multi-ethnic relating ministry. I'm here with my guy, Micah Gaston.
Yep.
Woo! I wish you had like a little horn. But I'm here with Micah, man. And listen, man, we got a special guest with us today. I'm going to let him introduce him, man. I know that you guys go way back, and he's a very intelligent guy, and a guy with a huge heart for the community, and all that good stuff. So I'll let you do what you do. How about that?
He's laughing, but he knows that's true.
Yes.
No, I don't. I'm just old. That's it. I've just lived a long time. Not intelligent, just lived a long time. I don't know.
Well, that at least means you're learning, right? You're not just getting older, not learning anything. That would be the opposite, right?
Oh man.
So yeah, Pastor Mark and I have been connected since when I first came here to Midtown. I went to my first Mosaics conference back in 2016, and so got connected there with the Mosaics Network. Of course, we're going to talk mainly today about church economics, but Pastor Mark has written extensively on what a healthy multi-ethnic church looks like, and really has shaped leaders all over the country through what Mosaics does, through the conferences and global, and all throughout the year as far as coaching and staffing, and really is a leader in this movement that is the multi-ethnic church movement. So, Pastor Mark, we'd love to turn it over to you and just you tell us a little bit about, how Mosaic came about there in Little Rock, about how the Mosaics Network came about, and a little bit about, just kind of your story and how you got this season of where you're leading as you are kind of in our country as far as multi-ethnic church leaders.
Yeah, you bet, Micah and Marcel. Great to be with you guys today. I think you should call it the M&M podcast, right?
There you go.
Get your M&M bags. And
hey, low key, that's the real name. You know what I'm saying? That's the real name.
No, but obviously you guys know I've been watching you and coming alongside at different points over the last 4 or 5 years, and just so proud of what you're doing there, and the camaraderie that you clearly have, the relationship, the transparency, the trust, and how that spills over into the church, into your ministry. So way to go, guys. Really, really proud of you and what you put together there as a team. Just as briefly as I can, I was born out of wedlock, 1961, raised in a single parent home in San Francisco, California. Hardworking, blue collar all my life. My mom held 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep food on the table, so to speak. She was gig before there was a gig economy, and I learned it with her on the streets of Alameda, selling Avon at 7, and washing dishes up at the restaurant, and all the different things we did. So to this day, I'm still just a blue collar guy, slugging it out every day, trying to make an impact for the kingdom of God. But I was raised Catholic, educated Catholic, Jesuit Catholic throughout a college prep experience. I was on a work scholarship, so my bill was paid because I worked in the rectories. I, worked for the priest, et cetera, for 6 years and helped pay my junior high and high school education with the Jesuits. But after that, a college baseball player in my freshman year, at the end of my freshman year, I came to know Christ personally. I was a junior college baseball player. The next year, whisked away on a full ride scholarship to a little school called Liberty University. Actually, it was Liberty Baptist College at that time.
Wow.
And played Division I baseball there when the school was just 10 years old for the next 3 years. So I went from Jesuit Catholicism to independent fundamentalist Baptist overnight. I spin your head. I was discipled by Keith Green music. And
Oh, wow.
3 years later, too slow to get drafted, had nothing better to do. And the church that I'd come to know the Lord at was a conservative Baptist church in Scottsdale, Arizona, where my mother and I had moved when I was in 6th grade. And again, having nothing better to do, I was a psych major. They hired me to be the high school pastor. I didn't even know you could get paid to do that. Did that for about a year and a half, making a whopping, I think it was $400 or $800 a month or something like that.
Wow.
But after a year and a half, the pastor brought me into his office. And he said, it seems like you like doing this. And I go, yeah, it's kind of cool. I enjoy it. And he goes, it seems like the kids respond to you really well. And I go, yeah, it seems like they do. I had about 70 kids in that high school group. He said, well, do you want to keep doing this? And I go, yeah. And he said, well, you can't keep giving your testimony every week, And so I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, if you want to keep doing this, you should probably go to seminary. And so instantly I thought Gregorian chants and robes and, because I was raised Jesuit.
Yeah, sure.
He's like, no, it's not like that. He goes, I go, where do you go? He said, you can go to Dallas Seminary, but you have to wear a blue coat, a tie, and gray slacks. Or you can go where I went to Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon, and wear jeans. So off I went to Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon, so I could wear jeans.
There you go.
Got a job as a youth pastor right away. Started the first skateboard church in America. 33 years later, it's still going with one of the two guys I started that with.
Wow.
Met my wife. We got married, continued a trajectory of youth ministry for the next 7 or 8 years. So when I had 10 years of student ministries experience, in 1993, a church here in Little Rock, Arkansas, a mega church, 2,000 people at the time, hired me to come over, take over their junior, senior high school ministry. It was about 150 when I got here. 8 years later, that church was 5,000 people. The youth group was 600. My staff was 9 full-time staff. I built a $3.5 million student center, paid cash for it. I was in the top 2% of paid youth pastors in America. I was living the dream. Wow. Until one day I looked around this otherwise amazing church and realized the only people of color were janitors.
Wow.
And that began to bother me.
Wow.
But I didn't know why in 1997 that bothered me, but it began to bother me. And so having a degree in exegesis, I essentially threw out my seminary notes, did my own study of the New Testament church, that is the nature, the character, the ethos, if you will, and came to realize that every church outside of Jerusalem was what we would call today a healthy, multi-ethnic, and economically diverse church. It was men and women, Jews and Gentiles, rich and poor, willing themselves to walk, work, and worship God together as one. And it was that demonstration of the power of Christ to be lifted up and draw all people into himself, not just some people to himself, that really fueled the explanation of the gospel. So it wasn't so much the explanation of the gospel, it was the demonstration of the power of the gospel of Christ to be lifted up, as I mentioned. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done where? On earth as it is in heaven, right? And all that's to say is in 2001, then I left that church, stayed in the city, came to the inner city, the urban center of Little Rock, Arkansas, 30% poverty, 66% of kids without dads in the home, highest violent crime in the city, to start what Christianity today would call 3 years later a big dream in Little Rock. And that was could diverse men and women of ethnic and culturally different backgrounds, economic backgrounds, again, will themselves to walk, work, worship God together as one in a local church here in the United States, and particularly in the urban center of Little Rock, Arkansas. And Micah, Marcel, I can't even believe it, but literally I am finishing my 20th year on May 31st, start my 21st year here at Mosaic in Little Rock.
Awesome.
Several years into that, by 2003, 2004, as I was sharing my vision, not only with people here in the city, but every now and then outside of that, I had extensive contacts through Leadership Network as a youth pastor prior to my life here at Mosaic. Most people said I was crazy, that it'll never work. People want to go to church with them, people that look like them, think like them, act like them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Birds of a feather flock together. And it was a lot of discouraging voices. That just did not believe it could happen. 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in the week. It's been observed since 1880 that that's the case. But every now and then I'd run into somebody that'd say something like, oh, I think there's a guy in Cincinnati trying to do that. Or I think there's a woman over here. And I would just network my way to that person. again, and we'd get on the phone and we'd commiserate, like he or she was discouraged. I was discouraged. Like people were putting discouragement on us, right? Not encouraging the vision. And we were sharing with one another and encouraging one another and learning from one another. And all of that led Dr. George Yancey, an African-American sociologist now at Baylor University, and I to form Mosaic's Global Network in 2004 with a vision to network leaders of like mind who had a passion to see the church on earth reflect the kingdom of God and the values of the kingdom of God in relation to who the people of God who walk, work, worship there in attendance. And so that was the genesis of the network, really just to connect people of like mind, to offer encouragement, mutual support, peer learning. We did that in the early years through retreats and just on the phone and any way that we could, speaking at conferences, in the back rooms when 5 people would show up, 3 people, and most of the people every now and you get, they'd sit there with their arms crossed like this. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't believe in it. And then, 10 years later, Black Lives Matter. Man. And all of a sudden the church started to pay attention, but it really wasn't until the latest round of tragedies, I should say, last year with the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, et cetera, the tragedy of Breonna Taylor, and even as we speak in the last couple of weeks, just on and on the names go, that the church, the American church, and particularly, let's just be honest, white evangelicals, kind of threw themselves on the floor and said, I don't know what to do, help me and tell me what to do because it cannot be sustained. So all that's to say is the work of Mosaics has continued to grow, particularly in the last 6 to 7 years, and working with churches to help them build healthy, multi-ethnic and economically diverse, socially just, culturally intelligent, and financially sustainable churches.
That's awesome.
Absolutely, man.
Well, I just want to take a minute real quick and just encourage you, if you're watching on YouTube at this moment, please take a moment, hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit that notification bell to get all the notifications and all the updates. But also, we want you to share this video, share it with your friends, share it with the co-laborers in the gospel, because someone else needs this. And so this is great content. We have a great guest on with us, Mark DeYmaz, and man, he's already dropping some incredible gems, and we haven't even started the real conversation yet. Right. So also, please follow all of our other podcast platforms. There's a link in the description. Just click that link and you will be tethered to us from here on out.
That's right. Never let you go.
Yeah, right.
Can't
Never let you go.
That's right.
Never gonna
I'll let you sing it. I'm not going to sing it. Nobody would listen after that if I sang it.
Oh, man. So listen. Yeah, let's move.
Let's move.
Let's move. I'll leave it over to you once again, because these are some very meaty questions, and so I'll let the meaty Micah.
I'm not sure if I want that nickname.
I don't know either. It came out. Don't judge him. Don't judge me.
I appreciate it. So, Pastor Mark, we know that you've written your most recent book is really about church economics and about, what is the biblical pattern for church economics? What does it look like, particularly for churches that are like churches we're leading, that are more urban, that are in contexts where, you want to reach all of your mission field. And some of that means you're reaching the single moms, matriarchal homes on fixed income, and obviously you want to reach those families with the gospel, but yet you want to keep the mission moving forward as well. And so why is it important for churches to begin to develop or diversify their strategy, their economic strategy outside of just what comes into the plate on Sunday morning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, in the 20th century, it was all about tithes and offerings, right? In the 21st, you're going to have to develop multiple streams of income, not only to survive, but to thrive in terms of advancing the mission of God, the mission of the church, again, going forward, at least for the next 30 to 40 years in the 21st century. We came into that reality of that, the understanding of the need to create multiple streams of income, because as I mentioned, when I planted this church in the inner city, 2001, coming from that very large mega church where literally money just, it almost like grew on trees. I went to my senior pastor one time and I said, hey, I need another person on my staff. He said, no, you need 3. And I got 3. You see what I'm saying? So it was like money was no object there. But when, and in a church like that, like most churches, it's the more people who join your church, you generate income, right? Through tithes and offerings, revenue, et cetera. When I planted this church in the urban center, we quickly realized that the more people who joined our church, it cost us money. Like homeless and undocumented immigrants and on it went. And very few professionals and a lot of blue collar or just slugging it out type folks. And if we quickly realized, our team, that if we did not learn to generate multiple streams of income, we would not be able to meet the needs of this community.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, if it was tithes and offerings, it'd be me, a janitor, and a secretary, and about 75 or 80 people. And we could have done that. But if we're going to have, and I'm not talking about growing a church of tens of thousands necessarily, I'm just saying the needs in the community were so great, let alone the needs of the church. And we realized tithes and offerings wouldn't be enough to cover that. If we're going to, again, advance bold mission and ministry in the community. So we got on this early, and this was an urban reality that now has become a reality for every church in America.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if COVID didn't teach you that, if you're a pastor listening, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
And I could go through a variety of statistics, but the book, The Coming Revolution in Church Economics, Why Tithes and Offerings Are No Longer Enough and What You Can Do About It, really articulates the theological understanding, the underpinnings of what we're talking about, the sociological reasons, and of course, it gives best practices in terms of how to begin that journey, like Mike and Marcel, you guys have done there. One of the things that people don't understand about this is the economics of it. I could just share with you this. We're not talking about like the church just getting rich and leveraging its assets. And by the way, I should define that. Church economics, like we're talking about, is the phrase that this is. What is church economics? It's leveraging the assets of your church, people, money, and facilities to bless the community. That is to advance the gospel, the mission of God, the common good, Matthew 5:16, but at the same time, generate some measure of sustainable income. Again, in addition to tithes and offerings, all about tithes and offerings. I'm just saying they won't be enough. Yeah. And so church economics is about, that's the definition. And in terms of application, we're not talking about a church, again, just sitting back and making money with its buildings, but doing it in a benevolent way and in a biblical way.
Yeah.
Right. Because like sometimes people say, what are you talking about? The church generating income? No way. It's a nonprofit. It's a church, for goodness sake. And they'll say things like, Pastor, just trust the Lord. Just preach the gospel and trust the Lord, and all your needs, that is the church's needs, will be met in Christ Jesus, right? Just trust the Lord. What do you say to a person like that? You know what you say? You say, let me ask you a question. You ever gone to a doctor? You ever taken prescription medicine? You ever signed a loan to buy a car you couldn't otherwise afford with cash? Where's your faith? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't live like that. Why don't you just sit in your house, read the Bible all day, pray, and then go out and check your mailbox? Do you have a job? Do you have two jobs? Do you get up and work hard? Where's your faith? Just sit back, read the Bible and pray, and just go check your mailbox, right? Individual Christians don't live like that.
Yeah.
So why would we think the collective church would not be intentional in regard to its stewardship, which is part of this, the reason on the biblical side, stewardship. When you read the story of the stewards, the talents, right? And everybody knows the story, right? This guy had 5, this guy had 2, this guy had 1. The master comes back. Hey, you gave me 5, here's your 5, and I made you 5. You gave me 2, here's your 2, and I made you 2. Well done, good and faithful stewards, good and faithful servants. One guy sat on his asset. One guy sat on his asset, and he's called a wicked, lazy slave. Yeah. Right. The American church is literally sitting on tens of billions with a B, of dollars of assets buried in the ground, like that last slave, that last servant, right? It's land that is sitting there undeveloped. It's buildings that sit empty from week to week, doing absolutely no good for the community, no good for any other reason to be there on a Sunday morning. It's a church of 65 people with a $2.5 million endowment in the bank. Wow. And nobody's getting saved. The community's not being engaged, but by golly, every person of those 65 people are going to tell you how proud they are of their $2.5 million in the endowment in the bank, right?
Yeah. Wow.
That is wicked, lazy stewardship. Wow. And we need to flip the switch and recognize the biblical moorings of good stewardship is not just managing what God has given to us, it's leveraging what God has given to us in a variety of ways to make disciples, yes, but also to generate sustainable income so we can make disciples for the next 100 years or 50 years or 30 years, whatever the lifespan is, and not just for the next 30 days. Because that's what COVID has taught us. It's not good stewardship merely to manage things. Most pastors in America right now, guys, And when it comes to economics and finance, all they're doing in their churches is managing decline. They're just managing decline.
Yeah.
And that's just the biblical reason, let alone all the sociological reasons. But to answer your question, these are some of the reasons we need to lean in to the concept of church economics, leverage our assets, bless the community, generate sustainable income.
That's good.
Absolutely.
So there's some people that may be watching who have not, are not aware of all the things that you've written and all the great content that you currently have out there. So could you just take a moment and kind of give them a preview or snapshot of your three-legged system when it comes to church economics? I don't know why that was difficult to say. Church economics.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate the question, Marcel, because it really ties into something I've been sharing with folks recently about, are you playing with a 20th or 21st century operating system? Right. So in the 20th century, it was tithes and offerings. 21st, multiple streams of income. In the 20th century, it was size. 21st, it's about influence. The greater your diversity and structural health, the greater your influence in your community. Right. In the 20th century, it was about explanation. In the 21st, it's demonstration. That's what you lead with. So many people have just simply repackaged 20th century technology in the church and are acting as if that's like, that's like the new thing. What you're asking me about is a disruptive technology for the church. It's a disruptive way of thinking about things. And Marcel, you mentioned the three-legged stool. That comes from a book I wrote called Disruption with Thomas Nelson in 2017, repurposing the church to redeem the community. But essentially, the easiest way to explain this technology, if you will, this structural shift for the American church, moving away from a single-dimensional to a three-dimensional playing field. And the way you can think about that in simple terms is like an American football team, right? You could have a killer offense, but if you don't stop the run and your field goal kicker can't kick a field goal, the snap goes bad, you don't win the game. You cannot win an American football game with a single-dimensional attack, just an offense, for instance. You've got to have a strong offense, strong defense, strong special teams, and all of those teams have to be playing synergistically, simultaneously minimizing mistakes, playing with excellence in order to win a big game, like a college national championship, the Super Bowl, et cetera. So when we think about the American church and this idea of disrupting the system and creating a structural technology, if you will, for the 21st century, we're talking about a three-legged stool. It's not offense, defense, special teams. We call it in the book spiritual, social, and financial. The spiritual leg is what every church, that's the playing field they're already on, right? They have a spiritual game plan, their evangelism, discipleship, worship, children's programs, visiting people when they're sick, rallying around women who give birth and bringing meals through a community group or a small group. Think about that as the spiritual game plan, like the offense. It has an offensive game plan, right? So every church has that spiritual leg in place, but far less churches have a social justice leg in place. Right? A biblical justice, a local justice in the community place, right? Where we're advancing justice, compassion, and mercy in a local community in a structural way, right? So what is one of the structures of the church by which we advance compassion and mercy? We send our people and our resources across the ocean, but people across the street don't even know your name. We've got to change that in the 21st century. They don't even know you're there. And that's not hyperbole. I was working with a group of Methodist pastors in Charlotte about 3 years ago. I loaded them in a 15-pack van. I'm driving. There's 14 of them. We pull out of a Methodist church, go across the street into an apartment complex. An African-American young woman, I'm going to say 25, comes out the door with a dog. I pull up alongside. Excuse me, miss, can we ask you a question? She goes, sure. I said, what can you tell me about the church across the street? You know what she said? What church?
Wow.
And the pastor of that church was in the van.
Wow.
See, we've got to develop that social justice compassion leg. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you're hung up on the word social justice, all that it means is be just to the society, right? And Micah 6:8, what does he say? But to do justice.
That's right.
That's not a CRT term. That's not a 21st century U.S. term. That's a biblical term.
That's right.
Right? So I would encourage you, don't be hung up on terms. We have to advance just living in society on behalf of Christ in a compassionate, merciful way. And we do that structurally by creating a second nonprofit, which is the second leg. Create a separate nonprofit. The church is a nonprofit, generates tithes and offerings, primary mechanism for generating revenue. The social leg, you create a separate nonprofit which then helps you qualify for local, state, and federal grants, other churches donating money. It generates a new stream of income and gets those works out from under a restrictive church budget to open that up to new possibilities to, again, advance justice, mercy, and compassion in your community through a nonprofit, your second leg. That's the social leg, we call it in the book. And then financial, of course, is what we're talking about today. That third leg, which is for-profit business enterprise, done in a benevolent way, leveraging the assets of your church, people, money, and buildings, again, to advance the mission, bless the community, but at the same time, generate some sustainable income. What does that look like? It's a church renting its facility, its parking lot. It's a church reconfiguring, Sunday school classrooms that are sitting there empty and creating a shared space, nonprofit, co-labor space, generating some measure of income, not charging top dollar, but not giving everything away for free. If you keep giving everything away for free as a pastor in a church, trust me, you're not going to be here in 10 years. Right? So even you say, oh, we have a gym, we let this community program use our gym for free. It all sounds very good, but who pays the water bill? Who pays the electricity? Who pays the toilet paper, the cups? You understand? What about the janitor? So I worked with a church one time, fellas, and they had a very large church. This church was 13 people in Raleigh, Durham. And they had a traditional sanctuary. They rented their sanctuary to a site of a multi-site church. They were so excited. Oh, this church pays us $2,500 a month to rent our sanctuary. It's so great, man. I don't know what we do without that money. Well, we got into their books. It costs the church $2,900 to have that church there. Wow. But they weren't thinking in terms of like commercial. We hired a commercial real estate guy, went out, we figured that space was worth $8,500 a month, and we raised their rent to $6,500. We didn't charge them top dollar, but we charged them $6,500 to cover the $2,900 cost the church was incurring and hire a full-time worship. We had a $36,000 a year salary to get a pastor in there for the first time. Oh, wow. So this is what we're talking about. It's smart economics, which of course none of us got in Bible school or seminary, right? Right. We didn't get 1 hour of one class of one seminary degree talking anything about business. And yet the church is a business. It doesn't exist to make top dollar. But if you don't run the church in a smart economic way in the 21st century, you won't have a church to run going forward.
Man.
Wow.
It's tough.
Yeah, for sure.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So we like to, there's so many different directions we could go. I'd like for us to talk about just a minute, if you'd be willing, Pastor Mark, to share just a little bit about some things you've done there, as far as applying these principles there at your space there with your Mosaic Church there in Little Rock to really apply these principles. So not just something you're writing on, because we've all read those theoreticians, that write a lot of stuff. They do a bunch of research, and they're very smart. But they're not really practitioners. They're not in the ebb and flow of applying this and writing as they're applying and seeing success. And that's one of the things I appreciate about your writings. These are all things that you've not only done your research, but you're in the middle of applying this in your context. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about what this looks like at y'all site there in Little Rock, ways you found to really apply this three-legged stool principle?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll just start with something not simple, but a lot of people are planning churches, or maybe they don't have a building right now, and they're saying, how can we raise money to get a building? Well, we actually put a building under contract when we didn't have the money, and eventually we bought it. It took us 10 years to get into it, but it was 100,000 square foot abandoned Kmart in the community. And before we were ever in there, we rented half the building to a suburban fitness club at a mere $2 a square foot, much lower market rates. That fitness club came into the inner city, created essentially a suburban club in 50,000 square feet of this space, paid us $8,000 a month that paid the $7,400 mortgage. They put $1.7 million into the infrastructure, heat and air and electric and water, which raised the value of the building. When I bought this building, it was worth $1.5 million. I paid $1.7. You'd say, why in the world would you pay $200,000 more than the building is worth? Well, it's because we had some inkling about this concept of church economics. And so when we got this building in, they put 1.7 in the infrastructure. The mortgage was paid by their rent. The building value jumped in 2 years or 3 years to $3.5 million. And by the time we got the loan, it was 3.9 million. Then we take a loan, we build out our side. Now our mortgage is 16,000 and we're up to $12,000 of income. We rent to the fitness club. We're literally just opened an event center. And God willing, by the end of this year, we'll have a 5,500 square foot grocery store here in the space, along with a lot of ancillary different projects and businesses that also pay us. A carnival uses our parking lot twice a year. It generates about $16,000 revenue for us. That's 1 month's mortgage payment just for hosting the carnival twice a year, right?
Wow.
So I could go through the different ways we leverage this building. People say, well, I don't have a 100,000 square foot Kmart. If I had one, I could do that too. Well, listen, I didn't have that for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And we saved money. That's one of the things. Don't spend, save. But all that's to said is that this is one way. Churches, of course, have property all over this country. There's property. And then churches are dying or denomination. You know what they do? They sell it. The worst thing you could do. Like they'll sell it and give away no, repurpose that property. Right. There are so many things that can be done, and it generates income for your ministry. And so Mosaics helps people with that. But that's just one way in terms of our property. To answer your question, Micah, this grocery store, for instance, we're in a food desert, and we address food insecurity through our nonprofit. We have the largest food distribution in Little Rock. But with the Chamber of Commerce, the mayor's office, working with a former NFL football player from Birmingham, actually, Alabama, you may know Carlos Dansby, but putting in a Dansby food store, which generates income for the church, 10-year contract with 3 5-year options, taking abandoned space. So I could go on and on, but we're just entrepreneurial that way. Mosaics Global Network is not only a network to resource and help others, but we generate sustainable income. And we share the profits, if you will, with the church. What does that mean? We created a separate organization, Mosaics Global Network, of course, in 2004. We have a number of products and services that we offer, and we help churches with cultural intelligence assessment and training, staff search. It generates income. Well, over the years, it's generated enough income where I could return 78% of my salary to the church.
Wow.
Okay. This year, our senior pastor is going to start taking more money from Mosaics Global Network so he can return money to the church, which allows us to sustain the mission of the church, hire more staff, et cetera. So we leverage the work of our nonprofit to generate some of the income that we as pastors make, which keeps us in the same space, because we're not out driving Uber and all that. No, we're still working to build multi-ethnic churches, just like we work with you. But we generate income, and therefore it's not in addition to what we make. We leverage that to help shape the budget of the church and be more transactional. So there's a variety of ways you can do this, and are going to need to do this going forward.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. So you've talked about a lot of great things thus far, and I know you got to go here soon, so I don't want to hold you too long. But I would love to ask you if you could speak to a church planner, a pastor who is planning a multi-ethnic church. What are 3 things you would sit down and tell him about church economics as they get started?
That's a really, really great question. Well, the first thing maybe that comes to the top of my head of all the things I could share, right? The first thing is I want them to understand the disruptive model, this 3-legged stool we're talking about, because you need a North Star. Right? You need a North Star to know where you're going. Secondly, there are no silver bullets. You will not get there overnight. If you're trying to build a healthy, multi-ethnic, economically diverse, socially just, culturally intelligent, financially sustainable church, right? It's going to take you as a planner 7 to 10 years to move from survival to stability. And another 7 to 10 to go from stability to sustainability. This idea that somehow, quote, you're sustainable in 3 years, it's a myth, it's a joke. All right. Wow. When church planning denominations tell you, oh, you got to get to 200 or 300 or whatever it is within 3 years, so you're sustainable. What that means is that you, at the end of 2 or 3 years, our funding is going to run out, and you need to have your own funding. And they're typically talking about tithes and offerings to cover the budget of the church, the salary of the church planter, other people on staff, or the different, programs or facilities they need to rent, what have you. The idea that you could be sustainable in 3 years is such a joke. What that is, it's like holding up your cell phone and taking a selfie in the moment. Maybe in that moment at 3 years, the tithes and offerings pay your bills. Let's say that happens, which only happens, by the way, for like 60% of churches in the first 3 to 4 years, because the first 30 or 40%, they don't make it past 4 years. But let's say you did that. What happens in 2 months when the school you're renting doubles the rent?
Wow.
What happens when your you don't have a sound system, you got to get a sound system, or the one you have breaks and you need to replace? See, you're not sustainable.
Yeah.
And this is a myth. And in my opinion, it's a joke. You can't be sustainable. The other in 3 years. And so it's survival to stability, stability to sustainability, which again gets to this fact there are no silver bullets. You have to understand that. You got to be like the turtle and not the hare. Remember the tortoise and the hare? You got to think like the tortoise. It's every day at a time. And how you bring this vision out back to this is this kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. And I don't mean that in a spirit, like just kind of be spiritual, if you will. No, what Jesus is talking about is that demon that he faced and the way it comes out was a very different kind of demon or demons that the other disciples had faced heretofore. You can plan a homogeneous church. You can go to a denomination. They'll give you a book. Follow these 75 steps. Follow these 200 steps. You can plan hey, it's like a recipe. No recipes with the kind of church we're talking about, the kind of church you guys are doing. This kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. And what does that mean? You have to be called. You got to know in your gut that God has called you to pursue this kind of church. From that calling comes your passion. And you're going to need that calling and that passion because the times are going to be so difficult. And you're going to feel like you do when you get on a motorboat and it's taking you spinning around an inner tube and you think you're just going to go flying off into the distance because the torque around the turn is so much. You're going to have to constantly remind yourself of your calling, and that passion rooted in calling will lead you to prayer, patience, and persistence. That's the only way this comes out. Prayer, patience, and persistence. You're going to have to depend upon the Lord and be intentional. You can't just sit around in your office or, at some coffee shop and say, and maybe you're a white guy and you pray, oh God, please send me, a person of color, whatever, that shares my vision, right? No more than you can go out and say, I'm going to get 2 black guys, 2 white guys, 2 Hispanic guys, 2 Asian. It's not about quota and it's not about wishful thinking. We just have to be intentional. And people are going to tell you like, well, if God wants this diversity stuff, God will make it happen. Right? What do you say to them, Mo? You ask them this question. Let me ask you about your preaching. You got a church, right? You go, yeah. Do you guys plan your preaching series? Do you plan what you're going to preach from week to week? Do you think about it? Do you lay out an order of service? They go, oh yeah. Say, what about worship? Do you figure out the songs you're going to use and you kind of put a band together? Do they practice? And oh yeah, we do that. What about evangelism? You have a small group strategy? Oh yeah, here's how we approach it. We're very intentional about that. What about diversity? Oh man, if God wants diversity, he's going to make it happen. That's like saying you say to somebody, how do you guys do worship in your church? Oh man, we just show up.
Sir Mark, talk to the people, man.
Say, what's your strategy? Are you guys intentional? Oh no, man. We just walk around the streets. We just walk around the streets and just wait for the Spirit of God to fall, right? See,
the Lord will supply.
Has a problem being intentional about all these other things in the Bible, except when it comes to building the kingdom of God on earth. Revelation 7:9, every nation, tribe, people, and tongue on earth as in heaven. Everybody's intentional in the church about that, except that. They don't want to be intentional. I'm saying, what is your deal?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Tough.
Absolutely.
That is so tough.
So be intentional.
Man. That's right, man.
That's good.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, it's been an incredible conversation. And again, for those of you who are watching, please make sure you subscribe, you hit the notification bell, and that you share the content because it is great. It has been great. Mark DeYmaz, you are the daggone man. And so, just real quick, if we could just take 30 seconds, you talked about the switch for you, or at least the discomfort, when you're working at a church and you saw that the only persons of color were janitors or the cleaning crew or whatever have you. What was the switch for you when it came to economics?
Well, I think the switch for me, Marcel, was like I mentioned, when I realized the more people that were coming our way, so to speak, both in terms of attending the church or giving the church a look, and or coming throughout the week to knock on the door of our little office at the time. All of it was costing us money. Like, it wasn't generating revenue. I mean, yes, some revenue was coming in, tithes and offerings, if you will, but nowhere near enough to fund the work of the church and or to meet the needs of the community. And so, as I mentioned, very quickly, we realized that we're either going to be a little small church just doing little small things and only taking care of our own with a couple of pastors and assistant, and having to turn the community away because we just don't have the money or resources, or we were going to have to pivot to entrepreneurial leadership and understanding. And that's where that switch came for us. And by the way, I should mention, guys, that, this is what I do. 80% of my time, is spent helping churches, church plants, churches, denominations through mosaics.info. That's our website, mosaix.info. But through coaching and curriculum and conferencing, et cetera, that we're here to help you build the type of church Marcel and Mike are pursuing there, as well as we are here in Little Rock. And if we can help you in any way, please reach out to me. It's easy to get in touch with me. Just go to the website, mosaics.info.
Absolutely. And let me just say that Pastor Mark means that. I've had him here to teach at our campus before, and he wasn't a guest speaker that was just went and like camped out in the motel. Like, he came and walked around our campus, and we sat and had conversations. And he really does have a heart for this, a God-given calling for this. And so he really will come and be an ally with you and for you, and help you grow the Mult-Ethnic Church God's calling you to. So he means that. So I encourage you need some coaching, some help, get in touch with them, and they really will help you take your next step. So thank you so much for your time, Pastor. Been amazing to connect, and so much wisdom and insight passed on. So we're so thankful for you and appreciate your investment in all the people listening to Meg podcast. So thank you.
Well, you bet, guys. Keep up the great work, and thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
Thank
no
you.
doubt. Make sure you follow Mark DeYmaz on all his platforms.
That's
and
right.
We'll put your link here in the description as well. But yeah, go follow this guy. He knows what he's talking about, in case you can't tell. So with all that being said, listen, go have a mega dope-tastic day. We out.
Absolutely. All right.